When you think about a fortress, you don't just um, picture the physical structure itself.
Right, it's more about the feeling of it.
Exactly. You picture the intention behind it.
Right.
Like incredibly thick, rough-hewn stone walls and a massive stagnant moat.
Yeah, a heavy iron drawbridge pulled up so tight the gears are just groaning.
Yes. It is designed fundamentally to be impenetrable. I mean, it's an absolute declaration of safety through isolation.
It really is an architectural manifestation of fear, if you think about it.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's a structure built entirely to keep everything dangerous, everything unpredictable, on the outside.
Right. Uh-huh.
You sacrifice mobility and connection for this absolute guarantee that nothing can touch you.
But, and this is the thing, the fatal flaw of a fortress isn't always like an invading army with a battering ram at the gates.
No, the truly terrifying scenario is when the threat isn't external at all.
Right. What happens when the foundation itself starts shifting? Because the very ground underneath the fortress is fundamentally changing its composition.
Well, then those massive stone walls just don't protect you anymore.
Right. They become a liability.
Exactly. The physics turn against you. The sheer weight of your own defenses becomes the very thing that collapses and, crushes you.
Yeah.
The defense mechanism itself becomes the ultimate hazard.
And that right there, that image of a defense mechanism becoming a death trap is the perfect entry point for what we are diving into today.
It really sets the stage perfectly.
So welcome to another deep dive. If you are joining us, you already know the drill. You're here to unpack complex concepts, to see the systems operating beneath the surface of the world.
And ideally, to get thoroughly informed without feeling like you're reading some dry academic syllabus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And today's mission is wild. I mean, we are hitting a completely unexpected intersection of massive pop culture and deep clinical behavioral psychology.
It is so rare to see these two worlds collide with this much analytical rigor.
So let's just set the stage for you. It is April 2026. We are sitting exactly 1 month away from the highly anticipated theatrical release of The Devil Wears Prada 2 coming this May.
And the promotional machine is literally everywhere.
Though you can't log on to any platform without seeing it. It's inescapable.
Completely.
But, and I really want to set the expectation for you listening right now, we are not here today to talk about the wardrobe changes or the red carpet rollout or Hollywood gossip.
So we have a stack of fascinating psychological analyses in front of us today.
Yeah, and these sources take the plot and the character dynamics of this upcoming sequel, and they run them through a highly specific, incredibly revealing psychological framework.
Right, which is called internal family systems.
Often referred to as IFS.
Exactly. And what these sources do is they strip away all the glamour to look at the structural integrity of the human mind under extreme pressure.
So our mission today is to use this IFS framework to understand how the shifting power dynamics of the digital age force these iconic characters to confront their internal architecture.
Which is fascinating on its own.
It is. But more importantly, the goal is to look at what this teaches you and me about navigating our own workplace trauma, our own professional growth.
Yeah, and the hidden systems we operate within every single day at our jobs.
Because if you look beneath the designer clothes and the biting dialogue, the sources argue this is, well, it's fundamentally a survival story.
100%. It's an exploration of power, vulnerability, and, what happens to the human psyche when the ruthless strategies that kept you safe for decades suddenly become obsolete overnight.
Okay, so before we start psychoanalyzing Miranda Priestley, we need to lay down the rules of the game. Let's unpack this internal family systems framework.
Let's do it.
And I want to keep us out of the academic weeds here, so let's use a tangible analogy. Think of your mind, right? Not as a single unified consciousness, but like a sprawling corporate boardroom.
I love this analogy.
Right. According to IFS, you are a multiplicity. You've got a whole cast of characters interacting in there at all times.
Yeah, they're constantly negotiating.
Exactly. So you've got the CEO sitting at the head of the table trying to maintain a vision. But down the table, you've got the panicked intern who is perpetually terrified of getting fired.
We all know that intern.
Oh, for sure. And you've got the aggressive head of security standing by the door who assumes literally everyone is a threat. And you got the burnt-out middle manager who just wants to take a nap.
Right, and IFS argues we all have these different, what they call parts, negotiating, fighting, and cooperating inside us.
Okay, so that boardroom visualization, how does that translate to the actual terminology used by our sources?
Well, there are 4 key entities within this mental boardroom that dictate human behavior. First, you have what IFS calls the self.
Okay, the self.
Right. In your corporate analogy, that's the calm, centered, compassionate CEO. It's your core essence.
So when you are leading from the self, you weren't freaking out.
Exactly. You aren't reacting out of fear or anger. You are clear-headed, curious, and balanced.
That's the state you're in. When you handle a massive crisis at work perfectly, and later think, wow, I was really in the zone there.
Spot on. But the reality is, the CEO isn't always in the room. Or at least they aren't always holding the microphone.
Right. They get pushed aside, and when the self steps back, who steps up?
The managers. Managers are the proactive protector parts of our psyche.
Okay, what's their job description?
Their entire job is to manage your life, your relationships, your environment to prevent you from ever feeling pain, rejection, or vulnerability.
Wow, so they are the relentless perfectionists.
Yes, the hypervigilant planners, the parts that make you rehearse a conversation 5 times in the shower before you actually have it.
Oh my gosh, yes. They are the parts whispering, like, if I can just control every single variable in my environment, nothing can ever surprise me.
And therefore, nothing can ever hurt me. That's their logic.
But we have to ask what they are guarding so fiercely, right?
Right. And that brings us to the third concept, which is the exiles.
The exiles.
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
It is. Exiles are the hidden, deeply wounded parts of us that we've locked away. They hold our past traumas.
Like the sting of childhood humiliation.
Exactly. Or our deepest fears of being fundamentally unlovable. Or the terror of profound loneliness.
Oh, wow.
And the managers work themselves to the bone to keep these exiles locked in the basement of the psyche so you never have to experience that agonizing emotional rawness again.
Okay, so you have the managers running around upstairs trying to maintain total control to keep the exiles locked down in the dark.
That's the baseline system.
But systems fail, right? The real world is completely unpredictable. What happens when a trigger gets past the security system?
When the manager drops the ball.
Yeah, and that raw, agonizing pain of the exile starts flooding up to the boardroom.
Well, the system recognizes that as a total psychological emergency. And in an emergency, the boardroom calls in the fourth and final element, the firefighters.
Firefighters, okay.
These are parts that react impulsively and often destructively to extinguish the emotional fire immediately.
So if a manager is proactive, calculated control, a firefighter is reactive, chaotic damage control.
Perfectly said. They don't care about the long-term consequences to your career or your health. Their only mandate is to numb, distract, or destroy the pain of the exile right this second.
Oh, I see. So the firefighter is the part of you that, after a soul-crushing, humiliating meeting where your boss makes you feel totally incompetent.
Which triggers that exiled feeling of worthlessness.
Right.
Yeah.
So that firefighter part drives you to go home, drink an entire bottle of wine, and aggressively text your ex.
Yes. Or max out a credit card online. Or scream at someone in traffic.
It's a total emergency override. Logic just goes completely out the window.
It's an impulsive intervention to stop the psychological bleeding, regardless of the collateral damage.
This framework is honestly basically a skeleton key for understanding irrational behavior.
It really is.
So let's take this psychological cast of characters and turn our attention to the ultimate manager herself, Miranda Priestley.
Oh, this is where it gets so good.
The sources point out that her internal system is experiencing a catastrophic crash in this digital age. Let's break down why.
Well, we have to look at the baseline first. In the first film, Miranda Priestley was the absolute, unadulterated embodiment of an extreme manager part.
Yeah, nobody managed like she did.
Her entire persona, her entire empire was built on icy, unrelenting control. She controlled every hemline, every lighting choice.
The literal breathing patterns of every single person in her orbit. I mean, she didn't just manage a fashion magazine. She micromanaged the actual fabric of reality around her.
Yes.
If she whispered, the whole world leaned in.
And from an IFS perspective, the sources ask why a person operates like that. It's not just a personality quirk,
Or it's purposeful.
Exactly. That extreme managerial control was a fortress designed to protect an image of absolute perfection and, crucially, to eradicate any possibility of vulnerability.
Wow. So that icy exterior was a highly engineered defense system.
Yes. Keeping her exiles, her deep-seated terror of failure, and the existential dread of being fundamentally alone, safely locked away.
And in the era of print media, where she just dictated the monolithic truth from the top down, that strategy worked flawlessly.
It did. But the sources highlight a massive contextual shift for the sequel. Runway magazine is bleeding out.
It is severely weakening against the relentless, decentralized tide of the digital era.
Yeah.
Like the ground underneath the fortress has turned to sand.
Exactly. The old rules of print media, the top-down dictatorial model, they simply don't map onto a fast-paced, algorithm-driven digital landscape.
Right, you can't control it the same way.
Miranda's legacy code of cold, silent control is ineffective. You cannot intimidate an algorithm.
No, you really can't.
You can't give an icy, purse-lipped stare to a shifting demographic trend on TikTok or social media.
It's like a legacy software program trying to run on a modern operating system.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. The old code, her cold control, it just keeps freezing and crashing. And the system doesn't know how to repair itself because the code is fundamentally obsolete.
And when the primary defense mechanism, this master manager, fails so spectacularly, the internal balance is obliterated.
Fortress walls are crumbling.
Yes. And when the manager fails, the exiles are exposed to the open air.
The basement door just gets ripped off its hinges.
Suddenly, Miranda is forced to confront those deeply buried wounds. The terror of impending bankruptcy isn't just a threat to her net worth, it is an existential psychological threat.
Oh, because it threatens to validate her deepest, most exiled fear.
Right, that she is a failure, and that without the artificial insulation of her immense power, nobody actually cares about her. She will be utterly alone.
Man. And the sources mentioned a very specific plot point here that ties right into this.
Yes, a negotiation.
Right. To save the magazine, to get the necessary capital or ad revenue, Miranda is forced into a corner where she has to humble herself.
Which is unprecedented for her.
Exactly. She has to seek help from Emily, her former assistant, who is now this major executive power player.
Yeah.
Now, on the surface, a casual viewer might look at that and say, oh, wow, character arc.
They'd think she's growing.
Yeah, like Miranda is learning humility. She's evolving. But the psychological analysis in these sources vehemently disagrees with that.
Strongly disagrees.
They say this is not genuine humility.
It is the exact opposite of growth. What we are witnessing is not a transition to healthy self-leadership. What we are seeing is a textbook firefighter reaction.
The emergency glass is being broken.
Exactly. The pain and panic of the exiles are rising up so fast, and the manager has failed so completely that the system resorts to desperate measures.
So humbling herself, asking Emily for help.
These are impulsive emergency maneuvers to extinguish the immediate fire of the magazine's collapse. It's not a shift in her core moral values or a newfound respect for Emily.
Wow.
It is a tactical survival maneuver to stop the psychological pain of losing her empire.
That completely recontextualizes how we view sudden shifts in behavior. She's not experiencing a sudden change of heart. She's just swinging an axe to stop the room from burning down.
Yes.
Think about the people in our own lives, or even massive corporations in the news, who suddenly do a massive PR pivot when they are backed into a corner.
Oh, we see it all the time.
Right. They release the crying apology video. They suddenly embrace the new trend. We want to believe they're growing, but often their firefighters have just hijacked the steering wheel to avoid the crash.
It's a crucial distinction between genuine integration and panic-driven adaptation.
Yeah.
And to truly understand why Miranda operates with such a toxic code, we have to trace the origins of that manager part.
Because she didn't just invent this brutal methodology in a vacuum. Right?
No, it was forged in a very specific, very hostile environment.
Which leads us into one of the most compelling parts of the analysis, the darker underbelly of Runway's legacy. We really need to talk about workplace intergenerational trauma.
This is such an important concept.
And look, I know trauma is a heavy, sometimes overused word right now, but the sources unpack it in a way that feels incredibly relevant to almost any high-pressure corporate environment today.
Absolutely. The sources view the evolving relationship between Miranda and Andy in this sequel not just as a boss and an employee, but as a living cycle of trauma.
Like trauma being passed down from one generation of professionals to the next.
Exactly.
We often look at the harshness of a boss like Miranda, and we just label it as toxic or evil. We think they just enjoy being cruel.
But the IFS analysis points out something much more tragic.
Right. Miranda doesn't see her harshness as cruelty at all. She sees it as a necessary, protective legacy.
To understand the manager, you have to look at the environment that necessitated it. Miranda came up in a fiercely male-dominated past.
Oh, the 80s and 90s boardrooms.
Right. The executive boardrooms of the 80s and 90s were not forgiving environments for women. To survive and ultimately to dominate that environment, she couldn't afford to show a single crack of weakness.
She had to be perfect.
She had to completely excise her own exiled parts. Her need for connection, her moments of doubt, her softness, her exhaustion. She had to encase herself in that impenetrable fortress we talked about earlier.
She basically had to psychologically amputate parts of her own humanity just to fit into the boardroom chair.
Amputate is the perfect word. And because that brutal, self-mutilating strategy is what saved her, what ensured her survival and secured her dominance, her internal system subconsciously registered it as the only valid way to survive.
Oh, wow. So she thinks it's a requirement for success.
Yes. So when she interacts with Andy, a younger woman she actually sees potential in, she isn't just trying to make her a good editor.
Right.
She is trying to force Andy to undergo the exact same psychological amputation.
She's passing down the armor. But it's armor that slowly suffocates the person wearing it.
Exactly.
The sources identify the implicit message Miranda is sending, the dark lesson she insists on passing down.
Yeah.
And it's honestly chilling. They say the message is, to succeed, you must kill your kindness.
Empathy, to Miranda's manager part, is a structural vulnerability that the system just cannot afford. It's a leak in the submarine.
Kill your kindness. I mean, think about how pervasive that is in corporate culture around us today.
It's everywhere.
You see this in law firms, in medical residencies, in high finance and tech startups. You have a boss or a founder who suffered immensely to get to the top.
Yeah, they worked 100-hour weeks.
They destroyed their marriages. They missed their kids growing up. They endured relentless verbal abuse from their own mentors. And instead of looking back and saying, I have the power now, I want to make sure no one else has to endure that.
They essentially haze the next generation.
Right. They justify it by saying, well, that's just what it takes to be great.
It's the psychological normalization of suffering. Because think about it, if they admit that success can be achieved without the cruelty, they have to confront the horrifying reality that their own suffering, all the sacrifices they made, were unnecessary.
Oh, that is profound. They can't face that their pain was for nothing.
Right. So Miranda wants Andy to become a clone. She wants Andy equipped with the exact same defensive manager parts, the exact same emotional numbness to protect the Runway empire.
She is engineering a successor psychology to mirror her own. It's psychological cloning.
And the stakes for the film's narrative are entirely built on this premise.
Yeah, if Andy accepts that premise, if she puts on that heavy, cold armor and kills her kindness, the trauma loop just clicks forward, continuing for another generation.
The toxic system wins.
The cycle remains unbroken. But the narrative tension relies on the fact that the Andy we meet in the sequel is fundamentally altered.
Yes, she is not the same Andy from the first movie.
Right, she's not the naive, stumbling assistant in the lumpy blue sweater anymore. The sources detail a massive evolution in her character, which sets up this profound internal and external battle.
Let's look at Andy Sachs and this journey toward what IFS calls self-leadership.
Let's do it.
The dynamic with Andy is incredibly complex because her baseline has shifted. She is now a seasoned, highly capable editor, and the sources make a critical point about the nature of her return to Runway.
Yeah, she doesn't go back because she is being manipulated or because she's financially desperate.
Or because she failed out in the real world.
Exactly. She goes back by her own lucid, clear-headed choice.
She recognizes the magazine as a cultural institution, and she wants to protect the legacy of the fashion industry through this digital transition. She is actively choosing the fire.
That lucidity is paramount.
Yeah.
However, just because she is operating from a clear-headed space doesn't mean she is magically immune to her past, right?
Not at all. And the analysis introduces a really vital, somewhat unsettling IFS concept here regarding Andy's psyche. It's called interjected parts.
Okay, let's pause on that. An interjected part, that honestly sounds like an alien parasite. Break down how that actually functions inside Andy's internal boardroom.
An interjected part occurs when a person absorbs the voice, the attitudes, the criticisms, or the behaviors of someone else.
Like an authority figure.
Yes, almost always a powerful authority figure or an abuser. And that external voice becomes a permanent resident in their own internal system.
Wow.
For Andy, she carries an inner Miranda.
That is deeply relatable and completely terrifying. Even when Miranda isn't physically in the room, even if Miranda is on another continent, Miranda is sitting at the boardroom table in Andy's head.
Exactly. When Andy faces a high-pressure negotiation, a difficult editorial decision, or a moment of crisis, she doesn't just consult her own intuition.
She hears Miranda.
She hears Miranda's voice, Miranda's cold pragmatism, Miranda's withering judgment echoing in her mind. Now, it's important to note that IFS doesn't view this inner Miranda as purely a malicious virus.
It doesn't.
No, it's actually a protector part that Andy's system built.
Wait, let me make sure I'm tracking this. So they're like, Andy recognized that the corporate world is full of predators, so she downloaded a piece of Miranda's predatory software to act as an internal defense system. She thinks, like, what would Miranda do? Miranda would be ruthless and cut this person out. Okay, I'll be ruthless so I don't get eaten alive.
Exactly the mechanism. The system internalizes the aggressor to anticipate and survive aggression.
That is wild.
But the immense challenge for Andy in the sequel is achieving true self-leadership. She has to lead her internal boardroom from that calm, centered CEO chair, rather than letting the inner Miranda hijack the microphone every time things get stressful.
And the sources highlight that Andy has been doing the work. She has successfully integrated her ambitious part with her moral values part.
Right. And we have to acknowledge what a huge paradigm shift this is from the first film.
Oh, completely. Back then, Andy's ambition and her morals were lock in a death match. Her friends, her boyfriend, her family, they all made her feel like the mere act of having ambition meant she was morally compromised.
She was trapped in a strict psychological binary. The world told her you could either be a nice, ethical person and fail in mediocrity, or you could be a ruthless, cutthroat monster and succeed at the top.
But the mature Andy has rejected that binary.
Yes, she has created a balanced identity. She wants to prove, both to herself and to the industry, that immense power can be wielded with empathy.
Which is revolutionary in that environment.
In IFS terms, empathy is not a weakness. It is a core, unshakable quality of the self.
She wants to be the CEO of her own mind who says, I can fire someone, I can cancel a contract, I can make the brutal financial call, but I don't have to destroy the other person's soul to do it. I don't have to be cruel to be effective.
This creates the central systemic tension of the entire narrative. As you look at Andy's journey, the stakes go far beyond just saving a magazine.
Right, it's bigger than Runway.
If Andy can help Miranda navigate this digital crisis by setting healthy boundaries and leading with empathy, she effectively breaks the intergenerational trauma loop we just discussed.
She provides a living, breathing proof of concept that the system can survive without the cruelty.
But if the pressure gets to be too much, if the magazine is hours away from folding and Andy panics and allows her inner Miranda to take over,
letting her ambition turn her cold and ruthless to save the day.
Exactly. Then the cycle is complete, the trauma wins, she becomes the very thing she fought against.
It is an absolute high-wire act of psychological balance. And while Andy is trying to walk this tightrope, trying to heal the system from within, we have to look at the third point of this narrative triangle, Emily.
Yes, Emily.
Because while Andy is trying to heal, Emily Charlton is out for blood.
Emily's trajectory provides arguably the most dramatic role reversal in the narrative, and honestly, the most volatile element in this entire psychological ecosystem.
It's a stunning shift.
Yeah.
And she went from being the perpetually terrified, physically sick assistant, fiercely protecting her desk right outside Miranda's door, to becoming this massive, autonomous, powerful executive.
She works at a major conglomerate now.
Right. She holds the literal purse strings. She controls the massive advertising budgets that Runway desperately needs to survive the digital transition. She holds the keys to Miranda's survival.
Let's break down Emily's evolution from the IFS perspective. Throughout her early career, her defining characteristics, her razor-sharp wit, her intense professionalism, her biting sarcasm, her obsessive diet culture.
All those classic Emily traits.
Right. These were all highly active protector parts.
We were her managers, trying to control the chaos of Miranda's demands.
Yes, manager parts designed entirely to secure her fragile position and keep her safe in Miranda's chaotic, punishing orbit. But now the context has shifted. She has immense structural power.
And she is using this power not just to do business, but to actively confront and squeeze Miranda.
The protector has become the challenger.
Wow.
But the fascinating psychological insight from the sources is why she is taking such a hard-line, almost vindictive stance in these negotiations. This isn't just a tough business person maximizing ROI. It's a deep psychological compensation.
Wait, let me push back on this a little bit. Emily holds the purse strings now. She's won. Why not just take the win, negotiate a standard, highly profitable ad deal, and walk away? Why does the IFS framework suggest she needs to actively crush Miranda? Isn't her behavior just ruthless corporate maneuvering, not deep psychology?
It looks like standard corporate ruthlessness until you examine the emotional charge behind it. She isn't operating from the calm, calculating self. She's operating from a triggered state, trying to compensate for her exiles.
Oh, okay.
Think about Emily's history. She suffered the brunt of Miranda's trauma. She was constantly undervalued, pushed to the brink of physical and mental exhaustion.
She was literally hit by a car while doing errands.
Exactly. And ultimately tossed aside, missing her dream trip to Paris so Andy could go. Those deep wounds, the visceral feelings of being unworthy, disposable, invisible, and humiliated are her exiles.
Okay, that makes sense. So when Emily is sitting across the mahogany table from Miranda, withholding millions of dollars in ad revenue, it's not actually about market metrics or audience engagement.
No, it's a battlefield.
Emily is finally letting her wounded, humiliated parts get revenge on the system that created them.
She is desperately seeking validation. The protector part has mutated into an aggressor because it operates under a logical fallacy.
What's the fallacy?
It believes that by dominating Miranda, by making Miranda feel as small and desperate as Emily once felt, it can finally soothe the pain of those exiled parts.
Oh, wow.
If she can make the architect of her misery beg, maybe the pain of feeling disposable will finally evaporate.
If I have all the power, I can never be hurt again. And I can punish the person who hurt me, which will somehow heal my past. It's such a deeply human, recognizable response.
We see this all the time.
Yeah, with people who get promoted over their former bullies or terrible managers. But as the psychological framework suggests, punishing someone else never actually heals your own exile.
It doesn't heal them at all. It just temporarily medicates the pain through the high of dominance.
Yeah.
It's an external solution to an internal wound.
And because the wound isn't actually healing, the behavior becomes erratic and highly volatile. So zoom out and look at the board here. We have a delicate, explosive triangle. Miranda is desperately trying to hold her crumbling digital system together with chaotic firefighter emergency maneuvers.
Right.
Emily is using her newfound structural power to wage a relentless revenge campaign to medicate her past trauma. And Andy is caught right in the middle, trying to lead from her calm self, acting as a buffer and trying to heal the whole toxic structure without becoming corrupted by her inner Miranda.
It is a powder keg of competing, highly stressed internal systems. A single spark could blow the entire thing apart.
And into this room, completely filled with gas, walks the ultimate wild kind, the ultimate psychological spark, Andy's ex-boyfriend, Nate.
The reintroduction of the Nate character is a brilliant narrative device to test the actual resilience of Andy's newly integrated system.
The sources are very clear on his function here. In the sequel, Nate is not just a romantic interest or a familiar face walking back into her life. He functions as a massive, destabilizing psychological trigger for Andy's internal boardroom.
Let's define that within the framework. In IFS, a trigger isn't just something that upsets you. It is any external stimulus that bypasses the managers and activates a specific, often dormant part of your internal system.
And Nate does that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Given their shared history, Nate activates several very powerful conflicting parts in Andy. First and foremost, he triggers her inner critic.
How does just his presence do that?
Yeah.
He doesn't even have to say anything mean.
Right. Because Nate has historically acted as the external mirror for Andy's internal guilt. During their previous relationship, his baseline stance was that the fashion world is inherently shallow, and by participating in it, Andy was becoming shallow and losing her soul. His very presence forces her system to immediately question its current choices. He makes her wonder if her ambition, her undeniable success, is actually a moral failure.
It's an automatic reflex. She sees him, and that old inner critic wakes up, grabs the microphone, and screams, "Are you a bad person for wanting to be powerful? Are you a sellout?"
It creates profound internal dissonance. She has done the hard work to integrate her ambition and her morals, but his presence threatens to cleave them apart again.
That's exhausting.
And secondly, he triggers a massive conflict between her nostalgic part and her adult self.
The nostalgic part. I think every single person listening right now can intimately relate to that. It's that part of you that romantically remembers a simpler time.
Well, for sure.
A time when you didn't have a mortgage or a massive team, depending on your decisions, or incredibly complex ethical gray areas to navigate at work.
Nate represents a time when Andy's life was, quote-unquote, pure. The nostalgic part feels the immense, crushing pressure of the Runway boardroom, looks at Nate, and wants to escape.
He wants to quit everything, throw the phone in the river, and go live a simple, uncomplicated life eating grilled cheese sandwiches and ignoring the world.
It's the fantasy of regression. But the adult self knows you can't just unring the bell. You can't regress.
Right. The adult self has to step in and recognize a very harsh, unromantic truth. Nate's past views of her world were not just pure, they were actually quite narrow, judgmental, and fundamentally unsupportive of her potential.
Exactly.
Her adult self knows that life is incredibly complex, that ambition isn't inherently evil, and that she has simply outgrown that simplistic black and white worldview.
She is caught in a violent internal tug-of-war between the comfort of the past and the reality of the present.
And the sources use a very specific IFS term for Nate here, which I found fascinating. They describe him as an outdated protector. What does that mean in this specific context?
Well, in the past, when Andy was first navigating Runway and losing herself, Nate's judgments actually acted as a protector for her old values.
Okay, that makes sense.
He was the anchor keeping her tied to her pre-fashion identity. He kept her from totally dissolving into Miranda's world. But if he returns in the sequel and still holds those same rigid, judgmental views, that protector becomes a burden to her current evolved system.
A burden.
Yeah.
Because it requires massive amounts of psychological energy to carry his judgment.
Right.
It requires energy to constantly explain yourself, your nuanced job, your complex decisions, to someone who is fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you because they prefer the old version of you.
Exactly. And the psychological task for Andy in this narrative is what IFS calls an unburdening.
Unburdening. Releasing the weight. How does she actually do that?
She must systematically release the need to justify her complex professional world to someone who insists on seeing it as purely toxic. More deeply, she has to sever the emotional cord that requires his validation for her to feel like she is a good person.
Wow.
Her morality has to be self-defined, generated from her own self, not Nate-defined.
If she can't unburden herself from his judgment, she's going to be constantly destabilized, second-guessing every move she makes. And here is where the narrative really accelerates.
Oh, it really does.
Because Andy, being distracted and destabilized by her feelings for Nate, doesn't just affect her internally. It sends shockwaves through the entire fragile ecosystem of the magazine.
Specifically, it sends Emily's internal system into an absolute five-alarm panic.
This is a perfect illustration of how interconnected these psychological systems are in a workplace. Emily's reaction to Andy's distraction isn't just annoyance. It is explosive and disproportionate.
Let's analyze this reaction because the sources go deep into why Emily responds the way she does. Emily views Nate, this guy who makes sandwiches, as a literal system threat.
A system threat.
Yes. Emily and Andy are attempting to build an alliance, a unified front against Miranda's chaos to save the magazine. This alliance requires absolute focus, trust, and unity.
So when Emily sees Andy's attention pulled away by a romantic entanglement from the past, she doesn't view it as a minor personal distraction.
Not at all. She views it as a critical structural vulnerability in their defenses.
Let's break down the specific parts of Emily that get triggered and take over. The sources mention the warrior protector.
The warrior protector is the part of Emily that fought tooth and nail, bleeding and starving, to climb the corporate ladder from assistant to executive.
It's aggressive.
Very. It's hyper-vigilant and fiercely protective of her hard-won status. When the warrior looks over and sees Andy wavering, looking at her phone, daydreaming about Nate, it deploys its primary weapons.
Which are?
Devastating sarcasm and sharp-cutting verbal attacks.
Emily's signature moves. The withering put-downs.
Exactly. But the psychological goal of the warrior isn't just to be mean for the sake of it. Emily is trying to wake Andy up. Emily is trying to force Andy to unblend from these soft, sentimental, nostalgic emotions tied to Nate and force her to face the cutthroat, life-or-death reality of the corporate war they are currently fighting.
It's like a drill sergeant in a trench who sees a soldier looking at a picture of their sweetheart while the enemy is charging.
That's a great analogy.
The drill sergeant slaps the soldier across the helmet and screams, "Snap out of it! We are under fire!" The aggression is a terrifying form of protection.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. But driving that aggressive warrior response, fueling the anger, is something much more vulnerable. Beneath the yelling is a deep, activated fear of abandonment.
And this is projection, right, because of the trauma of what happened in Paris in the first film.
Absolutely. In the past, Emily was unceremoniously tossed aside by Miranda in favor of Andy. Andy literally took Emily's place.
Right.
That trauma created a profound, unhealed fear of abandonment. Now, in the present day, if Andy leaves the fight to go be with Nate, if Andy decides the fashion world isn't worth it, Emily loses her only capable ally.
She is left utterly alone to face Miranda again.
It's the exile's worst fear realized in real time. abandonment and isolation.
So Emily tries to aggressively, almost tyrannically control Andy, not because she necessarily hates Nate as a human being, but because she is desperately trying to prevent her own internal system from collapsing under the weight of that triggered abandonment trauma.
She is fighting for her psychological life.
So Emily is basically looking at Nate like a malicious computer virus trying to crash her newly built, highly secure network.
Yes.
And her antivirus response is to just verbally nuke every single person in the room to quarantine the threat.
And in executing that antivirus response, Emily's system triggers a third tragic part, the judgmental part.
Oh, no.
By viewing Andy's emotional distraction purely as incompetence and weakness, Emily accidentally mutates into the thing she hates most.
A mini Miranda.
Precisely. In her absolute desperation to survive the pressure, she replicates the exact harshness, the exact lack of empathy that she suffered under Miranda for years. She demands that Andy kill her emotions for the sake of the business.
It's the intergenerational trauma loop playing out in real time. Emily is donning the heavy, suffocating armor of the person who abused her in order to protect herself from being abandoned. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And practically speaking, this dynamic creates a massive gaping vulnerability in their alliance.
Because they're fighting each other.
With Andrew distracted and conflicted by her own internal guilt regarding Nate, and Emily lashing out with toxic judgment and aggressive control, the unified front is broken. They are fighting each other instead of the problem.
The fortress walls have a crack, and no one, absolutely no one in the history of cinema or corporate America exploits a systemic vulnerability better than Miranda Priestley.
Which brings us to the climax of the psychological analysis. Miranda operating as the master system manipulator.
The sources detail how Miranda uses Nate as a pawn to divide and conquer Andy and Emily. And the terrifying part is, she does it all without ever getting her own hands dirty.
It is psychological warfare executed with the precision of a scalpel.
It really is. Miranda's brilliance, her dark genius, lies in her intuitive, almost predatory understanding of the internal systems of the people around her.
She can spot an exposed exile or a panic protector from a mile away.
The sources outline a very specific, highly calculated three-step manipulation tactic she employs to destroy their alliance. Let's walk through these steps. Step 1, targeting the exile.
Right. Miranda orchestrates situations, meetings, sudden deadlines, emergencies, where Andy is forced into a corner and has to choose between her immediate work commitments and her personal time with Nate.
But she doesn't just create a scheduling conflict, does she?
No. Miranda uses a calm, highly calculated, almost musical, sarcastic tone to remind Andy of past disappointing choices.
Are you going to disappoint me again, Andrea? Just that whisper of a threat? The quiet disappointment that cuts deeper than a scream.
Exactly. This is a surgical strike on Andy's internal system. It immediately triggers Andy's deep-seated guilt and her fear of failure.
Wow.
By forcing an impossible choice and applying that specific historical psychological pressure, Miranda effectively paralyzes Andy's calm self. Andy becomes blended with her anxious, guilty parts. She loses her clarity, making her confused, reactive, and easily controlled.
If the CEO of Andy's mind is paralyzed by guilt, Miranda can just casually stroll into the boardroom and take over the controls.
Precisely.
Okay, step 2, toxic comparison.
With Andy off balance and doubting herself, Miranda turns her attention to the structural integrity of the alliance between Andy and Emily. She employs toxic comparison to fracture it.
How does she do that?
Miranda will publicly, in front of everyone, praise Emily's relentless focus, her dedication, her ruthlessness, and simultaneously she will loudly note that Andy is distracted by, as the sources phrase it, making burgers.
She actively pits them against each other, using their insecurities.
But look at the specific psychological mechanics of what she is triggering. She is perfectly activating Emily's judgmental protector.
Ah, right.
Miranda is validating Emily's aggressive warrior part, essentially saying to Emily, you are right, you are the strong one. Andy is weak, distracted, and incompetent.
She is weaponizing Emily's own trauma against Andy. Miranda knows Emily fundamentally resents weakness, because weakness gets you fired and abandoned. So she highlights Andy's perceived weakness, and Emily predictably takes the bait and attacks Andy.
The alliance shatters from the inside out.
Miranda engineered the explosion, but she let Emily light the match. It is the dark, Machiavellian side of systemic awareness.
It really is, and it sets up the final maneuver. Step 3, the symbol of failure.
Imagine this scene. How does she use Nate to execute this final step?
Miranda treats Nate as invisible, or worse, she treats him as an object of profound pity. If he's in the room or if his name is brought up, she doesn't attack him directly. She dismisses his very existence as irrelevant to her reality.
The microscopic sigh of pity, I can just picture it. She pours a glass of wine, looks at Andy's phone buzzing with Nate's name, and just gives this tiny, almost imperceptible sigh of disdain.
In IFS terms, that tiny sigh is a targeted missile aimed directly at Andy's ambitious part.
Oh, wow.
It is designed to make the parts of Andy that want to succeed, the parts that enjoy the glamour and the power of this high-powered world, feel profoundly ashamed of her connection to him.
So she's using shame.
Yes. Miranda is implicitly pushing Andy to sever ties with Nate, not for logistical reasons, but as a blood sacrifice. She wants Andy to cut him off simply to prove her worth, her seriousness, and her loyalty to Miranda's ecosystem.
Miranda is demanding a psychological amputation. Cut off this piece of your life. Prove that you don't need comfort to prove you belong in my world.
It's the ultimate test of the intergenerational trauma loop.
Oh.
Will Andy amputate her connection to her past, her emotional needs, her empathy to secure her place in the power structure? Will she become the clone?
This manipulation pushes the entire system to the absolute breaking point. The tension is unbearable. How does Andy escape this trap? She can't just run away, but she can't become a clone of Miranda either.
It all comes down to the finale. The sources set the stage for the hypothetical climax of the film, the post-production dinner in Paris.
A mirror to the climax of the first film, but with entirely different internal stakes. The pressure is at its absolute highest. Paris is the epicenter of the fashion world.
At this dinner, surrounded by the elite, Miranda sets a final, inescapable trap. She demands that Andy compromise her core moral values or a deeply held personal boundary, likely regarding Nate, or perhaps throwing someone else under the bus, in order to secure the massive advertising contract the magazine needs to survive the digital pivot.
It is framed as the only way to save Runway. It's the ultimate sell your soul for the greater good moment.
Yes. And here, in this high society pressure cooker, we see the culmination of Andy's psychological journey. We see the IFS triumph unfold step by step.
Let's break down the triumph. Step 1, unblending.
In the past, faced with this kind of brutal public ultimatum, Andy would have reacted from one of two blended places.
Okay, what were the options?
She would have reacted with sheer panic and fear, her wounded child part giving in to Miranda's terrifying authority, or she might have struck back angrily, storming out from her defensive warrior part.
But instead, she does something revelationary.
She takes a breath.
She pauses. The space between stimulus and response.
That pause is everything in IFS. In that pause, she recognizes the inner Miranda screaming in her head, pushing her to be ruthless, telling her that survival requires cruelty, but she doesn't let that introjected part take over the boardroom.
She steps back. She unblends.
Yes. She observes the panic, the pressure, and the ambient fear in the room from the seat of the calm, centered self.
She physically regains the CEO chair in her mind. And once she is firmly seated in that calm, clear-headed state, how does she look at Miranda? Because the natural human instinct would be to look at her with pure, unadulterated hatred for backing her into this corner.
This is the radical, almost unbelievable shift. Andy looks at Miranda not with submission and certainly not with hatred. She looks at her with genuine compassion.
Compassion for the devil. That is incredibly hard to conceptualize.
It's possible because Andy's self can see clearly now. She isn't looking at the terrifying manager fortress. She sees the cracks in the stone. She verbalizes the dynamic aloud, dismantling the manipulation by naming it. She essentially says to Miranda, "You are trying to trigger my fear and force me to be cruel because you are terrified of your own collapse. You are lashing out and demanding sacrifices because you are desperately afraid of being alone and powerless in a world you no longer control."
She names the exile. She bypasses the towering, icy armor and speaks directly to the terrified, lonely person hiding in the basement.
And then Andy makes the ultimate declaration of self-leadership, the thesis of her entire arc. But I don't have to be you to save Runway?
I don't have to be you.
Yeah.
That is a terrifying realization, to realize you've been building a personality just to survive someone else's trauma, and a profoundly liberating one to let it go.
It is the definitive breaking of the intergenerational trauma loop. Andy rejects the dirty tactic. She refuses to kill her kindness.
What does she do?
Instead, she offers a creative third solution, which is a hallmark of operating from the self. The self is not bound by false, fear-based binaries. She negotiates the deal on her own terms, incorporating empathy and modern strategy.
And crucially, she accepts the risk that she might be fired for doing it her way, because she has finally unburdened herself. She no longer requires Miranda's validation to know her own worth. So if we look at this as an interconnected ecosystem, what is the systemic result of this? What happens to the other characters, the other systems,
Yeah.
when one person in the room finally stands firm in their self?
The ripple effect is immediate and profound. Andy's radical calmness acts as a psychological circuit breaker for the entire toxic system.
The circuit breaker.
Yes. Because Andy doesn't react with fear or anger, Miranda's fear tactics have nothing to latch onto. They're completely neutralized. This forces Miranda to physically pause.
Bereft of her control mechanism.
Unable to manipulate the situation, Miranda is finally forced to sit with her own lonely exiles, if only for a moment.
The fortress is dismantled, not by a battering ram, but because someone simply refused to engage with the siege. And what about Emily, who has been vibrating with toxic stress this whole time?
Seeing Andy stand firm, witnessing proof that one can survive and even win in this brutal environment without being ruthless, changes everything for Emily. It fundamentally alters her reality.
It proves she doesn't need to be cruel.
It makes Emily's internal system feel psychologically safe. It proves that the environment doesn't require her heavy, aggressive warrior armor anymore. She is finally allowed to drop her toxic defenses.
The resolution of the film, as outlined in our sources, is incredibly poignant and quiet. The film closes with Andy leaving the glamorous party. She steps out into the Paris night. She takes out her phone and texts Nate. But it's not a desperate romantic plea to get back together.
No, it's a mature, clear-eyed apology. It's the final necessary step of her unburdening. She is taking accountability for her parts, acknowledging her own missteps, without needing him to fix anything and without needing his permission to live her life.
And then she shares a genuine, unguarded smile with Emily. She has navigated the impossible. She saved her career. She helped guide the magazine through its crisis. And most importantly, she saved her soul from the trauma loop.
She successfully led her internal system, which allowed her to heal the external system. It is a masterclass in applied psychology.
What an incredible, sprawling journey from the source material. It is so much more than a story about clothes or magazines or demanding bosses. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to connect this narrative directly to you, the listener.
It's important to bring it back to real life.
Think about your own workplace. Think about your own daily grinds, your Zoom calls, your endless email threads. Which parts are driving your career right now? When you send that aggressive late-night email, or when you snap at a colleague over a minor mistake, or when you agree to take on a massive project you know you don't have time for, are you operating from your calm, confident self?
Or are you letting an inner Miranda run the show out of sheer fear? Are you building a fortress to protect an exile?
It's an uncomfortable but incredibly necessary question to ask if you want to find genuine fulfillment and balance rather than just survival.
It really is.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Something that builds on everything we've dissected today. We spend so much time villainizing the toxic bosses in our lives, the Mirandas, the founders, the managing partners.
We build our own mental fortresses to protect ourselves from their cruelty.
But what if, when you look closely at the Mirandas of the world, you aren't actually looking at a villain at all? What if you're just looking at a frightened, deeply exiled part of a person that managed to lock the calm CEO out of the boardroom and take over the controls?
And if they are just frightened parts operating out of survival, reacting blindly to their own pain, well, that changes how we respond.
Exactly. Take that a step further. If that's true, then maybe the ultimate power move in any career, or any relationship for that matter, isn't growing a thicker skin. It isn't building a taller stone wall or carrying a heavier sword or pulling the drawbridge up tighter. Maybe the ultimate power move is having the radical, terrifying courage to finally put the armor down.
That's a powerful thought to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, and more importantly, keep questioning the systems inside you. We'll catch you next time.